Thanks for clicking on the video. Like, subscribe, and share if you find this useful or interesting. Okay, so I've been playing around with this thing for a while, and I realized that I've been procrastinating too long. Not only do I have all of this stuff related to the rolling blends sitting outside of my main structure, but even in here, I have this lazy folder where I just packed everything that was related to the 3D curves. So all these edges here and the nose, which is where I need to spend most of my time, is split between having some sketches here, some sketches here, and I need to just bite the bullet and do a reorganization of all this stuff here that controls the curves and all this stuff here that controls the rolling ones. So I'm going to do that. Okay, after a bit of work, I've reached this stage. First off is all the rolling blend business has gone into this temporary lazy 2 folder, but I've already eliminated the first lazy folder. So now when I look at my layouts, they include all the poses I will need to create the control sketches for the 3D curves. So if I look back in here, I see I've grouped everything I had before into the skeleton, which has the overall sketches and the poses that allow me to position the layout, the section layouts. Then I have the section layouts. And then I have silk poses between those layouts that I will put, which I will use to place the control sketches for the 3D curves. When I look in the let me turn all of that on, all of that off. When I look at the control sketches, now I have them all together. And they're organized in 3 groups. The planar sketches that are on the sections themselves. Then there's XY driver sketches for the spans, which function in a similar way to the section planar sketches. And then altogether I have the Z follower sketches, which will allow me to compose the curves into 3D. So these are all the basic planar sketches here that do the main job of defining the shape. And these are the planar sketches that pull those primary shapes into 3Ds. When I look at my primary setup, now there's a ton of stuff on top of each other, but it's broken down into intermediate polys, which are things that I need to build up my 3D polys. The gray ones here are the original spans that were just straight from when we first built the lump object. Then after that, I have all the polygons that have been absorbed into 3D. Below that, I have my final polygons, which are my actually primary shape drivers. These will control the curves and the surfaces. The first round of control grids, which are very rigid and parallel in the corners, and that's severely distorted by the fact that I have really stretched out these curves and I'm almost breaking rule 0 in this corner by aligning the edges of the patch. But I don't use those directly because I have applied flow grids to them, and the flow grids have helped space things out. Now notice that it's fighting. I have this section here widening in the middle. You might think, well, it would clearly be better if there was a gradual change in the middle, but what's been prioritized by the flow grids is the flow of these outer sections. You can see that these are reasonable, right? Well, although it's not perfect. Yeah, it could be somewhere in these points here could somehow be somewhere in the middle, but the flow grid is really fighting to deal with this corner here, and that's the result I get, and I think it's passable, although not perfect. And now, so with this organization, I have completely absorbed the changes related to making these curves in 3D. And now I need to similarly eliminate this lazy folder by taking all the cut points and putting them in a good location in here, and all these segment polygons and all the little bits and pieces of grid, and all of that will have a proper place in the blending setup. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I've completely dismantled the second lazy folder and took everything inside of it and put it in here. So for example, if I look at my point on curve cuts, they now have my rolling blend cut points, and I've divided into the overall cut points and the rolling subcuts. Now something interesting that happens here is, you see, this organization cannot be perfect. I've gone back and I flagged these guys right here as being yellow, because even though they're on the original sections and they are the only cut points on the original section, they follow from the end, right? This middle blend here is a simple blend from side to side, but it doesn't stop, it doesn't follow the red points anymore. It has to jump all the way here, which corresponds to a yellow point. So they still live in the overall cuts, but I've tagged them yellow. It's very difficult to have a perfect system for this because it's all context dependent. And so what I'm facing here is that there's way too much stuff in here. This is not readable, but there's no perfect way to organize it. A lot of these things in here almost only ever make sense to look at by themselves. For example, here's pieces of curves. These corner cuts will never could make sense joined with the middles, but they will never make sense on top of the rolling segment curves, because the rolling segment curves literally live on top of the corners. So sometimes I want to see the corners and the middles, and sometimes I want to see the segment curves in the middles. There's just no perfect solution, especially early on. But one thing I can see is when I look at all these grids, there's a simple way to divide them. And that is, do they end up producing final surfaces, or do they not end up producing final surfaces? So I don't have a perfect way to sort all of this into less folders, but I'm going to sort all of this into just 2 folders. Intermediate grids, which do not produce a final surface, and final surface grids. So I'm going to cut off the recording and take care of that. Okay, so I just sorted all the grids into intermediate blending grids or final surface grids. In the intermediate blending grids, I have, for example, the rolling corner grids that will be rounded, the blending grids along the edges that have been built from these corner rolling grids. I have the edge grids to blend that come from all the vertical surfaces. And I have separated out and grayed the edge grids to blend from the original subdivision, which we ended up abandoning, right? All of these gray ones is exactly what was replaced with these roll grids to blend. And if I turn them both on, you see that they were different and that they were behaving somewhat randomly, because the way these were created originally didn't know anything about the fact that we're going to make rolling corners. So it was just much easier to just make new ones rather to fight these guys and all their references to fix them. I could probably delete this. I'm just going to leave it there. Doesn't matter too much. It's relatively easy to find what I want in this folder. If I want to work on tuning the corners, I can turn on the corner subgrids. If I want to see the full corner grids while I do that, I can look in my final surface grids and turn on the full blended grids, for example. And now that I've done that, actually, I think that I'm finally tired of all this stuff here, and it's time to sort it one way or another. All the points will go together. The stuff related to the blending preview can go together, because I gotta be honest, I rarely look at it. This is neat to have when you're working early on with just the sketches and you're trying to put together a main structure. Later on, I really rarely look at it. So I'll group those two. I'll group the points, and even though they're sometimes on top of each other, I will group the middles, the corners, and the roll segment curves. And that will shrink down this folder quite a bit. All right, and now I've grouped everything in the blending setup. All the points together, although most often I don't want to look at the ends, but it's not too hard to go in and say, oh, in this context I want the starts, or in this context I want the ends. Then I have all the bits and piece polygons. I rarely look at these. Once I create these, I put a curve on them, and I rarely look at them. There's a few exceptions to this case, but they don't apply to this model. Then I have all my blending curve segments, and I almost always want the middles, but sometimes I will want to work with the full corners, and sometimes instead I will want to work with the corner pieces cut into two to define the rolling blends. So it's a two-step operation instead of having a single folder, but the payoff is that the list of folders and the blending setup is now readable. I have about a limit of 10. If there's more than 10 things in a folder, unless they're all like literally identical, right? And like in the case of these guys, all of this is the same stuff. Unless they're literally identical, then I want to organize them. The number may be different for you, or maybe you like really long lists. Then here's all the curves. By itself, here I have the polygons and the curves of the blending preview, because you don't really use it at this stage anymore. You have the final surfaces. You don't need to look at blending previews. But I'm keeping them here because I'm going to show you at the end that if you look at them a certain way, these blending previews can give you a pretty good idea of what's going on when you're building the very early model and you're still copy pasting around the curve that's split into 3 segments. Then here I have all my intermediate blending grids. And here I have the final grids out of which I make surfaces, and there are different types. Some of them are simple pieces of the original surfaces. Some of them have gone through 1 level of blending, and these guys right here have gone through 2 levels of blending. They're blends of blends. And then here I have, let me turn all of these off. Then I have a folder with all my final surfaces. And right now I'm still including these roll rounded surfaces here, which are flagged red, because when I replace them with fill surfaces, I think that should live in the CAD folder. And here in my CAD folder, I have 2 copies of the solid object from the curves workbench. And that's because the links that I use for view sets don't allow me to create per link view properties. And so I want to have one that shows the lines, and I want to have one that doesn't show the lines. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so this is good in terms of the organization here. It's not perfect, but if you want to see a different group of things with easy access, then that's what the view sets are for. Don't mess up your primary organization here just because sometimes you want to see 2 things together. If you want to see 2 things together easily, that's what a view set is for. So for example, here in the primary and cut points, I have made copies of the curves, linked copies of the surfaces, and then the primary cut points, the first level cut points, and the rolling blend cut points. So I can see all those things here. Anything that's more complex or more subtle than this belongs in a view set. And as a matter of fact, right now I want to create myself a couple more. So I'm going to take these 2 right here, and I'm going to put them right above my final surfaces. And then for this primary thing right here, I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to make a solid of these primary unblended surfaces. I'm going to have a version like this with the black lines. I'm going to have a version like this without the black lines. Because now I really want to take a look in detail at these primary surfaces, and specifically how they are behaving close to the nose where I am right on the edge of breaking rule 0 with this top and bottom surfaces because these guys are almost aligned. So let me create those two solids and come right back. And here we are. So I've taken all the primary surfaces and made two solid objects out of them, same as I had done with these two right here, gave them similar colors, and I made view sets of them. And so here's what this is about. Now that I have all my blend in place and I want to do the final design loop, I really need to nail down these curves. So this view here, even at fairly low resolution, shows me clearly what the curves are doing on the edges of my primary surfaces. And I don't have to hide my points when I do that. And I can still have this transparent. Because the transparency can hide problems. This looks fine, you don't see any issues. But when we crank up the resolution here, we might see more interesting details. And then the version without the lines is an extra diagnostic to see changes in highlights. But to see